check in with the executive director of Colorado Rising Action, Michael Fields, to talk about some of what's happening in Colorado politics, because sort of like nationally, there's never a dull moment in what's happening in Colorado politics. Michael Fields rejoins us on the Jimmy Sangenberger Show. Hey, Michael, how are you?
Hey, good, Jimmy. It's good to be on with you.
Good to have you, as always, my friend. And look, this week was really something with the show that was the Independent Ethics Commission hearing on former Governor John Hickenlooper. Wants to be United States Senator and replace Cory Gardner, but apparently he has to be dragged kicking and screaming a day late to testify when he was subpoenaed and ordered by a court to testify. What's going on here?
Yeah, I don't think it could have gone worse for John Hickenlooper this week. This has been an issue that's been ongoing for a while now. They finally set a date when they were going to put him up in front of the ethics committee. People agreed that this was the time to do it until John Hickenlooper said, I'm not going to show up. And he really didn't. And so they had to subpoena him. And the committee got really upset with him. They even sent the AG to enforce the subpoena. And at the end of the day, it ended up that he got held in contempt. And so I don't know what his lawyers were doing, what he was doing. But this is bad headlines for him on top of a case where he was flying around in private jets and shouldn't have been. So I think this really couldn't have gone worse for him.
Let's take a listen to some of the sounds from this week's hearings.
That the governor, notwithstanding being a mayor and a governor, had not been through any training on the ethical laws involved, because all legislators are mandated to go through it. I went through it. Shortly after I became a legislator, I was offered a very similar trip on a private jet out to the Jordan Cove on a huge oil and gas pipeline issue that's still before the state and that the governor supported. And I knew enough to say, I don't think I can get on a private jet without paying for it.
By failing to honor the subpoena of the commission, the respondent has indicated a disrespect for the rule of law, disrespect for the commission, disrespect for the process, disrespect for the parties and the witnesses, a disrespect for an agreement that was made to appear voluntarily before the commission.
I agree with what's been said. The only additional thing that I would point out is, as I pointed out yesterday, we have some 7 other matters scheduled for today, and this is an inconvenience to all of those parties. There's been unnecessary expenditure of private and public resources due to all this delay and the maneuverings. So I would like to consider sanctions later. Thank you.
You guys should be protecting me on stuff like this.
And in that comment, who is you guys? You guys should be protecting me.
Oh, I was referring to the journalist I was talking to because, there was one journalist I was talking to, so you guys was other journalists.
Okay.
Michael, what do you make of the way in which John Hickenlooper answered some of these questions, how he conducted himself when he finally got to testifying, but also the clear frustration of the commissioners on this Independent Ethics Commission when the former governor wants to be the next senator, said, nope, I don't want to show up. It's just not important enough for me to do so.
Yeah, I think they took it very seriously. You remember a couple of these people he appointed to this committee. So these aren't hostile people towards him naturally, but they've seen how this is dragged out, how they've put up every roadblock possible so he doesn't have to testify. And they really came down on him hard. And they said, look, as a committee, we have other people, other issues that we need to take care of. We don't need the AG spending a whole bunch of resources trying to track him down. Why doesn't he just come in and do this? And so I think, it was a very strong reaction, much stronger than I even thought would be from these committee people. And I think it was warranted. He said, even when he came to testify eventually, he said, I didn't really prepare for this. And I think that is something that's insulting to the process and insulting to, should be insulting to citizens in Colorado.
Well, of course he said I didn't prepare for this, because he probably didn't, because he wasn't expecting to actually show up, because he thought he could get away without showing up.
Yeah, and we're the ones paying for his lawyer, right? He had 2 lawyers.
Right.
One is a $525 per hour taxpayer funded lawyer, and the other one came in from the DSCC from Washington, D.C., and neither of them could give him good enough advice to not totally botch and butcher this process. And so, I think that the headlines have shown it all this week with that contempt, with the fact that he hasn't been prepared, and the underlying charges that I think are legitimate.
And so in terms of the legitimacy, I mean, look, I had not heard that there was such a thing as a Maserati limo until I first interviewed Frank McNulty of the Public Trust Institute about this in 2018, just before the 2018 election. What's interesting to me is there were some conservatives at the time who were like, this is a distraction. We should be focusing on Polis. And I had McNulty on twice on my old morning show, Business for Breakfast, where you filled in before, and also on the Jimmy Sangenberger show. And we had a conversation about it. And I was just stunned. Maserati limos, flights paid for by corporations, and we're talking significantly more than the ethically permitted amount under, I admit, I concede that the constitutional limitation on gifts is too strict, but nevertheless, he went well above and beyond that. And even back in 2018, I thought we need to get this out before he leaves office and have this investigation because you need to hold these people into account.
Yeah, and everybody has to play by the same rules. If you don't like the rules and think the amount's too low, you can go and change it. But every other elected official in Colorado has to play by those rules and has been doing so. And if they want an opinion, they go to the ethics committee beforehand and say, is this possible? We've talked about other elected officials who have said, you know what, we want to go on this trip. Is it legal? Is it ethical? And they say, yes, go ahead. Hickenlooper blew through all that and said, you know what, I don't even care. I'm going to do this stuff anyway. But yeah, I mean, I think this is also something that this case that's brought right now has 6 different incidences, but those are the only ones in the statute of limitations. We have dozens and dozens of other ones that happened before that. So this was a pattern that he did, and he's hopefully going to be held accountable.
Yeah, the one thing that I've noticed is that, and this is kind of like Joe Biden in some ways, Michael Fields, our guest, executive director of Colorado Rising Action, and that is when he's in the hot seat, when he's put on the spot, he's not very good. He's not so fluent. He's not the folksy person that he's known to be otherwise. He can't answer tough questions.
Yeah, and I think this is something that he hasn't been challenged to the degree that other politicians have. And I think it's going to hurt him this year in general. But he's somebody who said he wasn't cut out to be a senator. He didn't want to do it. They asked him why he didn't debate more against Romanoff, and he said because he likes to get his sleep. This is somebody who's going to be under the limelight for the rest of the year, and I don't think he's going to handle it very well. And he wasn't really a great leader as governor. I mean, he benefited from the fact that there was, split government in, Republicans and Democrats in the House and Senate for most of his term, his 2 terms. And so he's just somebody who hasn't shown a lot of leadership, hasn't shown a lot of motivation, and he doesn't do well under that kind of pressure. And there's going to be a ton of it this year.
So, Michael, when we look at the 2020 senatorial race, how big of a deal do you think this will end up being? Not just the whole case in and of itself, but the fact that Hickenlooper flaunted the process, disregarded it, tried to get away with this idea that he's above the law, even saying, I mean, we heard him tell reporters in the past, hey, you guys should be protecting me from this kind of stuff. So we see how he's been handling it. How do you think this could actually impact the 2020 election cycle? Is it going to be a big issue?
I think it will be a big issue. I think it's hard to tell. Any kind of predictions in politics, especially in a year like 2020, is going to be next to impossible. But I think people don't like when people have ethics violations and then decide to skip subpoenas and have to get contempt, held to contempt. I think that it's really going to have a long-lasting impact. But I also think the more Hickenlooper gets out there, I mean, he has 2 debates with Andrew Romanoff next week. And, you're going to have Kyle Clark and other people questioning him, and we'll see how he's able to hold up against that. But we know Cory Gardner's a good debater. He's a good senator. I think the contrast is going to be there when somebody doesn't want the job really and somebody really does and is doing a good job with it. And so I think Cory has a lot to talk about, the positive stuff after the COVID stuff, all the testing, that he got at the masks, the ventilators, BLM, tax cuts. I mean, there's just a long list of things that Cory has done well for our state, and we'll see what the mood of the electorate is, based on what's happening up in the presidential race, et cetera. But I think Hickenlooper, the more he's out there, the more he's exposed for the person who's not prepared and doesn't want to be doing this.
Yeah, I have to say, and by the way, BLMU meant Bureau of Land Management moving to Grand Junction. So just want to clarify.
Yes,
with all that's going on, I want to make sure folks, Michael Fields, know what
yeah.
you're referencing. But going to your point about Hickenlooper, I mean, isn't it kind of hard to really muster up the strength to answer these questions if you don't think you're cut out for the job?
Yeah, I mean, I think you look at it and
literally he said that. Remember?
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, he does. And this is the problem that he has is this is a 6-year term. I mean, I just can't imagine what Hickenlooper in year 4 or 5 is going to be like if it's this bad starting out of the gate. He's somebody who was a mayor for 8 years or 6 years, 8 years, and then 8 years as governor. And now he's moving. I don't think he wants to do it. And I think it's showing. And I think Romanoff's going to end up getting a lot more votes than people think just because of the backlash of the comments Hickenlooper's made recently about the Black Lives Matter stuff, about some of the positions that he's taken, which I think are the Romanoffs are too extreme, obviously, on healthcare and energy and everything else. But in the Democratic base, there's a lot of people that don't like Hickenlooper, and so I think he's worried about this primary even before he gets to Corey.
Although what's so interesting, you mentioned Andrew Romanoff, and I just have not seen him take up the issue of the contempt now, of Hickenlooper going before the Independent Ethics Commission. At least on social media, I don't see a peep from Romanoff.
No.
I don't understand why.
He hasn't done it. I think he thinks that it's not, it's a charge that is, being pushed and doesn't agree with Amendment 41. But I think this is a huge opportunity to just even rip on the process, though, and say, look, if this was him and he had this, he would have gone and done what the judge said and done what the ethics committee said and talked about why he wasn't guilty. I think there's a huge opportunity for Romanoff to jump on this. The problem is he hasn't raised money. He hasn't gotten a lot of attention. I think if he could have put together a better campaign, he'd have a real shot right now, given the timing of all of this when ballots are going out. But Romanoff has really, I think, been a disappointment for a lot of the further left people in the primary who really want somebody as an alternative to Hickenlooper.
And final question on the 2020 election cycle. Michael Fields, again, our guest, Executive Director of Colorado Rising Action. When we look at the race for Senate and Cory Gardner's reelection, what do you think he really needs to – look, I mean, when we're talking about an election, you need to boil things down to some key points. What are the key points that Cory Gardner needs to emphasize in your view?
Well, I think one is the economy. We don't know what it's going to look like, but if it starts bouncing back the way that it even has this last month, they thought there was going to be, 8.5 million jobs lost, and we end up with 2.5 million jobs created, unemployment going down. That is going to be something that is going to be huge because people thought we were going up to 20% unemployment. I think the policies, how strong the economy was before COVID hit, is what would help bounce back now. And I think a lot of that has to do with the policies that Cory helped implement with the president. But I think the other thing is just all the things that he's done for Colorado. We talked about the headquarters of BLM. We talked about, Space Command coming here, the bipartisan ranking, the high bipartisan ranking that Cory has gotten, the bills that he's passed. I think there's a strong case with tax cuts and everything else, but this is what he's bringing back home to Colorado, why he's a good senator. I think that tied with the economy could be a winning message.
So, Mike.